sharing our stories. We're a bit late today, and again, I apologize for our technology difficulties. I'm Ann Crimmings. I'm glad you could join us tonight. We have a very compelling session for you with our speaker, Ina Simakovsky, who I will introduce momentarily. But first, I'd like to thank two people, Sharon Izzy for contacting our speaker, and our technology volunteer expert, who you can see we really need, and that is Hassan Choman. Thank you, Hassan, as always. Let me quickly review our process and procedures for tonight. We ask that all audience members please turn off your microphone and your camera. You'll still be able to see and hear the program, but it will reduce background noise and interference for all of us. Ina's presentation will be about 45 or 50 minutes long, followed by a question and answer session. And we use the chat feature on Zoom for asking questions. So you can submit those questions on chat in writing at any point during the presentation. And when the presentation is concluded, I will then read those questions aloud for Ina to address. Ina, are you comfortable taking questions from the audience tonight?
I would love to take questions, and not necessarily at the end of the presentation, because I'm a little bit, 4 a.m. is my time that I'm really on. So at this point, this is not my best time, but yes, questions are absolutely welcome.
So we'll be turning to asking questions from the audience. And if you could then turn on your camera and microphone and keep your question brief, that would be great. And finally, there's no sharing our stories in December, which is our tradition. It's a busy month, but our programs will resume on January 25th, 2022 at 7 p.m. So we hope to see you then. Now let me introduce our speaker. Ina Simakovsky is an attorney in Columbus specializing in immigration law. She was raised in Ohio after emigrating here in 1976 as a refugee from the Soviet Union. Ina earned her undergraduate degree from University of Cincinnati and her law degree from Ohio State. She began her law career in the not-for-profit sector on the West Coast, and later moved back to Columbus and worked in the legal department at Columbus Refugee and Immigration Services. In 2007, she established her own practice, Simakovsky Law. Ina will be speaking to us tonight about her experiences as a Russian refugee here in the US and the current experience of immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. She will also talk about how ordinary folks like us might have a positive impact on the immigrant community in Columbus. So Ina, we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I recognized one name, and that is Sharon. And later in my presentation, I will comment on how Sharon and I met, which is pretty relevant to kind of embracing the immigrant community and doing positive things that might, we might not have had the opportunity to do, but due to our political situation over the past 4 years, we have the positive impact of that is that strangers have become friends around the refugee and immigrant community. Like I said, this is not my best hour, so I apologize if I'm not as fresh as sometimes I would like to be. But thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to share my story. As an attorney, we're always taught to really prepare. And as I was kind of preparing this slideshow, I actually learned a few things that I didn't know or I had forgotten. So this is really very educational for me. So thank you for this opportunity. And again, questions are absolutely welcome at any point, whether in the middle or at the end. So as Anne stated, I am a refugee from the former Soviet Union. which obviously no longer exists. Refugees, just a quick definition of refugees, because I think terminology sometimes gets a little bit confused. But a refugee is a person that immigrates to the United States already with status. So refugees are coming into the US and they already have legal status. The term refugee means that they are fleeing persecution based upon their religion, their race, their nationality, their political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Obviously, race, religion, nationality, and political opinion are pretty self-explanatory. Social group is one of the categories that has had the most politicalization around it. So social group includes things like gay people, female genital mutilation, clans. So in the clans of Somalia, a lot of Somalis get refugee status because of their clan. So social group is a very evolving topic. During the Trump administration, and by the way, just a lot of times I'm asked to speak and people ask me not to be political, and I really can't not be political because of what I do and because of the past 4 years. So I apologize if I offend anyone, but I'm not a big fan of what the Trump administration did to refugees, asylum seekers, and just immigrants in general. So under the Trump administration, they really changed the definition of social groups. So it used to be women fleeing domestic violence could apply for asylum, people fleeing gang violence could apply for asylum. And under the Trump administration, they changed that definition. Under Biden, they've now changed it back. So social group is one of those evolving topics that tends to change quite a bit. In Ohio, we have a very, very large refugee population. We have probably the second largest Somali population. We have the largest Bhutanese population. We have a very large Iraqi, Ethiopian, Congolese. We're now getting a very large influx of Afghani families. So Columbus and Ohio in general, but specifically also Columbus, has a large refugee population because of the ability to have affordable housing. And also there are a lot of jobs that do not require the English language. So people are able to work in factories or warehouses, and they do not need to speak English to take those entry-level jobs. So that is kind of the definition of a refugee. And I'm sure all of you know someone that is in refugee status. Refugees, when they come to the US, in Columbus, we have 2 refugee resettlement agencies. One is Us Together, and one is Community Refugee and Immigration Services, CRIS. We had a 3rd refugee resettlement agency called World Relief. And I think that closed the first year that Trump slashed refugee numbers. I think World Relief closed. And I do see someone named Kay. Is that the same Kay that used to work at World Relief? No? Okay.
Oh, her name is very similar to mine, though.
Do you know her?
No, but I've seen her name.
Okay, I thought maybe that was you. I was going to say hello. So in terms of kind of the refugee, this slide is so small, I can't even, the refugee numbers, this is a statistic that I pulled from 2018. But if you look at where Ohio is, Ohio resettles, besides Texas and Washington, Ohio resettles a lot of refugees. Ohio is the 3rd largest, at least in 18, of refugee resettlement. And again, a lot of refugees want to come where they have family. And because of the large numbers in Ohio, people want to join other family members. Again, the numbers of refugee, if you look down the list, Congo, Burma, Ukraine.
Ina, could I interrupt? This is Ann. You might want to advance your screen. We're only seeing the photo. Click to the next slide, maybe.
Can you see it now?
I am not seeing it. I'm seeing a beautiful photo of mountains by the sea.
Oh, you are. I am in my PowerPoint. You're not seeing my PowerPoint.
I am not.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do then. Hassan, do you have any suggestions?
I am here. Yes.
That's Tom's background. The mountains by the sea.
I think we thought that was your screen.
No.
Could you stop sharing screen and reshare? Try to reshare, Miss Ina.
So push stop share.
Yes.
Okay, that I push stop share. And then what do you want me to push?
But we are still seeing your screen. It says you are still. It says it looks you are still sharing screen. Your computer.
I put stop share.
Right there now it's stopped. Now just try to share screen. That screen again.
Okay.
Now your presentation is open,
Yes.
but probably it's doing because of the security issues. It's not showing entire of the screen. It's just showing the background picture.
Okay.
So Miss Anne, maybe we are gonna do just send me email. I can share for you.
I did. I tried to send it to Ann. It's too big.
Can you send it from Tom? It's now on Tom's computer?
We have the same.
Oh, okay. I'm going to suggest that maybe we just proceed with the presentation then without.
You're killing me. I spent so much time on this.
Sorry, this is a new problem for us. We've never had this problem before.
Yeah.
Okay, let me try to do this. Let me
So
try
it's a server issue. It's security problem. That's why it's not showing entire screen.
we have a very tight security.
Yes,
Sure.
because that's why it's not
Right.
allowing to sharing your screen.
Try to do this. Hold on. Let me just try to delete some. I apologize. I'm just going to delete some of those slides and maybe that will.
You might send 2 emails. Split it
She
in
said
half.
it's just Miss Ina, just try to send our email when it says too big. Just ignore that to just send it. It's just warning to. It's gonna be sent, but it's a little bit maybe takes time.
All right, well, it's sent, but I'm not sure it really sent. It's probably saying it's too big again. Yeah, it's too big. Okay, well, that's okay. I apologize for that.
Oh, it's not your fault. It's just one of those things that happen. But I think the audience would still love to hear you speak
Sure.
about your experience as a refugee and your professional experience.
Sure. So in going through, in terms of refugees, the largest number of refugees that are coming from the Congo, Burma, Ukraine, Bhutan, Eritrea, Afghanistan, El Salvador, Pakistan, Russia, and Ethiopia. Refugees are also, the way that the refugees are determined is also, of course, as always, a little bit political. Right now, there is a war that's going on in Ethiopia, and we get a lot of calls from people that are trying to bring their family over from Ethiopia, and they're asking about whether or not there's a refugee program in Ethiopia, and it takes a long time for what's happening on the ground to what's happening in allowing refugees to come. It takes a long time for those two to catch up. And not only does it take a long time, but it takes a lot of the human toll is incredible in terms of how people suffer while the US decides who is a refugee and what refugees we're accepting. And under the Trump administration, unfortunately, the number of refugees were severely slashed, and the number of refugees that arrived that were given permission to arrive, we had the Muslim ban. So the amount of people that were coming from countries like Somalia were severely slashed. In terms of my own refugee story, So I was born in 1971 in the Soviet Union. I was born into a completely non-religious family. So we were Jewish because Jewish was stamped into our passport. And Judaism in the Soviet Union was not necessarily a religion. It was like being Ukrainian or being Georgian or being Azerbaijani. So it was an ethnicity, a culture. And even though in the US, Judaism is considered a religion, in the Soviet Union, it was considered an ethnicity. And so when you were born, you were given a passport. And if you were Jewish, the word Jewish was stamped. Your father's ethnicity was put into your passport, and your mother's ethnicity was put into your passport. And I struck the jackpot because my mother was Jewish and my father was Jewish. So I was double Jewish. My parents were quite educated. They had both attended university. My mother's parents were, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was a very good communist. He served in World War II. He was a map maker for the Soviet Union. So he drew maps regarding like where all the troops were. My maternal grandmother was a scientist. So my mother was a very, very big rule follower. Whereas my father's parents were hustlers. Like they worked, my grandfather worked in a cafeteria. So he had access to a lot of goods that could be sold for services. So under the communist regime, you know, everything was socialized, everything was collectivized, everything was shared. But the only way that people could get ahead was bartering goods for other goods and services. My dad was a dental technician, so he had access to a lot of gold, and he practiced dentistry in our home because that's how he made his income. And I was put in a closet with candy so that as a child, I would not talk about the things that my father was doing. We were a fairly, well-to-do normal family. But my rule following mother felt that there were absolutely no opportunities in the Soviet Union. And I was also a pretty sick kid. I had some kidney issues, and my mom just felt that there was no way to treat me, and there was no future in the Soviet Union. So my mom convinced my dad to apply for an exit visa. So in the 70s, I have this amazing picture of Gorbachev and Carter. These were, remember Gorbachev with the one eyebrow, for anyone that remembers Soviet times. So in 1972, the Soviet Union had a diploma tax. So anyone that wanted to leave the Soviet Union had to pay pretty much almost 20 times their salary to leave the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did not want the Jewish people to leave Russia because a lot of the Jewish people were the scientists, and they were the doctors, and they were the musicians. So it was a very big brain drain on the Soviet Union when all of these Jews were applying to leave the Soviet Union. And a lot of the Jews that were applying to leave the Soviet Union were applying to leave to go to Israel. So as a communist country, we as Jews could go to Israel, but we shouldn't be coming to the United States because that would look very poorly upon the Soviet Union. So a lot of the Jews that were applying to leave were basically denied leaving. We were very fortunate. We were allowed to leave the Soviet Union. When we did eventually leave the Soviet Union, my mother's parents' apartment was burned down because they had raised a daughter that didn't follow the rules. They had raised a daughter who wanted to leave the Soviet Union. So their apartment was burned down. And We left the Soviet Union in 1976, 1975 we left. And my mom did not see her family until the Soviet Union fell under Gorbachev. So my mom returned to the Soviet Union in 89. And then my mom and my parents both brought about 35 family members to the US. But our immigration story is very similar to lots of refugees who don't necessarily want to leave their home country, but have no choice. There's no healthcare. We didn't have necessarily the kind of trauma and the rape and the killing of the clients that I currently represent, but we had absolutely no opportunity for economic growth or economic freedom or healthcare, or with the dentistry that my father was practicing in the closet, it was pretty sure that he would be jailed. My father actually went into the military, and because he was Jewish, he was assigned to collect nuclear fuel out of the nuclear rockets. So when we came to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where we ended up, he was asked to draw, and well, he didn't draw, but he was asked to look at maps of the Soviet silos and the Soviet rockets, because I think at that time it was the CIA was just trying to determine where the Soviets had all of their underground weapons. So that was the story that my dad tells, that he was able to contribute to US defense policy at the time. One of the first big refuseniks, which were Russian Soviet Jews that were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union, was a man by the name of Anatoly Sharansky. He applied for an exit visa to Israel in 1973, and he was denied a visa. The refuseniks were people that the Soviet Union did not want people leaving, because they stated that people had state secrets, and therefore they couldn't leave because they would share those state secrets. So Anatoly Sharansky became sort of a very public human rights figure, and someone that really, I remember in high school, just really being very moved by his story, because he was jailed, and he was kind of the voice and the face of the Soviet refusenik movement. My dad and my brother met him several years ago, and my dad approached him and started speaking Russian to him. And I think he freaked him out, because once you encounter like the USSR KGB or any of those secret police, that trauma stays with you forever. I actually found an amazing, my grandfather's exit visa from the Soviet Union to Israel. And my grandfather's name was actually Semyon Israel Simakovsky. So there was no way that my grandfather could hide with a name like Israel. So in 1974, the US started putting pressure on the Soviet Union to release its refugees. And I think that that's really important to remember, kind of in the work that I do now and in trying to get others motivated to do similar work, is that it really starts with regular people that really believe that refugees should be able to come to the US. So in 1974, there was a bill called the Jackson-Vanik bill, which basically stated that the US would only sell wheat to the Soviet Union if the Soviet Union released their Jews. So we were sold for Wonder Bread. But that was sort of very interesting. I always forget that, politically, how much goes into passing these bills and how much goes into kind of putting pressure on Congress to recognize that people are suffering and that we were suffering. So I feel an incredible gratitude towards the US in giving me the opportunity to leave the Soviet Union, and for people marching and protesting, and just, there was the slogan of "Let my people go." And I still I just tear up when I think about so many people caring about Russian refugees and wanting them to have a better life. So one of the things that I totally forgot, or maybe even didn't know about, is that when we left the Soviet Union, we had exit visas only to Israel. And we traveled, so you couldn't take a plane, obviously, from the Soviet Union to Israel. So we went to Italy. And in Italy, we were put up by the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It's an organization called HIAS, and HIAS is still in existence. It's the largest refugee resettlement organization. It's out of New York, and HIAS currently funds the organization here in Columbus. HIAS used to fund Jewish Family and Children's Services, and when Jewish Family and Children's Services in Columbus stopped doing resettlement, HIAS gave the funding to an organization called Us Together. So we ended up going from the Soviet Union to Italy. And in Italy, we were allowed to basically pick where we went. Did we want to go to Israel, or did we want to come to the US? And why I think that's really kind of, when I was preparing for this, that really struck a chord with me, because I would say 90% of the Russian refugee population in the US voted for Trump. And when you ask why you voted for Trump, they would say, well, we came to the US legally, we came to the US correctly, and others should do the same. And this included lots of people in my own family. And in researching this, what really struck me was the fact that we didn't come here legally. We were supposed to go to Israel. We were not supposed to come to the US. And the statistic that I pulled up is that between 1970 and 1988, there were 291,000 Soviet Jews that were granted exit visas. So almost 300,000 people were granted exit visas. And this is before the fall of the Soviet Union. 165 immigrated to Israel, and 126 immigrated to the US. So those of us that came to the US kind of didn't come here, what we would say necessarily legal. I mean, we came here obviously legally, but we weren't supposed to come here. Our exit visas were to go to Israel. So I plan on blasting this on Facebook to my relatives in particular, but I don't speak to them anymore. So it's going to be a little bit touchy. The next slide that I have is my own citizenship certificate. So I became a citizen of the US through my parents. I became a US citizen in Louisville, Kentucky in 1984. When we immigrated, so we went Soviet Union, Italy, we were allowed to take $96 with us. We were allowed to take a suitcase with us. We were not allowed to take anything else with us. We did, a lot of the refugees, when they left the Soviet Union, they did bring other names with them so that when they came to the US, they could call other people to come to the US, because it was, there were lists of names and lists of people that wanted to leave. So it was very important to bring those lists. I definitely remember my mom put on, it's called a shuba. It's like this big coat. I was 5 years old, and I remember my mom sewing jewelry into it. So when we came from Italy we were adopted by a family in Louisville, Kentucky. We were what's called a free case because we didn't have other family members here. At the time when we came, there was no Are we still on? Hello?
Yes, you're on. as far as-
Oh, okay. Sorry. It's so quiet. I'm not used to so quiet. When we came, we didn't have other family members. So we were adopted by a Jewish community in Louisville, Kentucky. And my mom still keeps in touch with the family that adopted us. And what it means to be, I mean, basically we were resettled by HIAS in Louisville, Kentucky. We were put into Section 8 housing. We received food stamps. We were helped with getting our social security numbers. I was enrolled in the school. We were helped with employment, but just, you know, there's certain things that refugee resettlement agencies have to do. And then there's certain things that just people that really believe in refugees and helping refugees do. In working in the refugee movement and in working with refugee agencies, I worked with Jewish Family Services in San Francisco, and I set up the immigration program here at CRIS. Refugee resettlement agencies really are not capable of doing the work that they're supposed to do. They get paid a very minimal amount, and it's really kind of so important for people that, for other community members to step up and to welcome the stranger and welcome the refugee and adopt a family and go out of your comfort zone and just kind of be present for someone that is different than you, because it's the right thing to do. And it's so incredibly appreciated. Being a refugee, especially being a refugee kid, was really, really difficult. You know, my parents arrived here in their 30s. They didn't speak any English. I remember my task. I remember this so well. So when you went to Kroger and when you bought a can of corn, it was like 30 cents or 40 cents. But if that can of corn didn't have the wrapper on it, then it was 5 cents. Or if it was banged up, so a lot of cans that didn't have labels, so you didn't know what you were buying, right? You're buying corn, you're buying peas, you're buying turnips, you don't know what you're buying in the can. So my job was to peel the wrapper off of the corn so that we could get it for cheaper. So that was my entrance into the fact that, you know, we had no money, we had to survive on very little, and it was very difficult for my parents. And I have no idea how they did it. I mean, to come to a country where you don't know anyone, you don't know the language, and you're just trying to do better for your kid. Like, I just think that that is such an honorable thing to do. And it's just so, there's so many parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles that do that now, that want a better life and a better future for their kids. And they're willing to do anything and everything to do it. And now what's happening is they're coming from, you know, they're crossing the border and they're applying for asylum, which is very similar to being a refugee. I just pulled the statistics about the largest refugee camps in the world. Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya houses about 300,000 people. Bidi camp in Uganda houses about 230,000. Dolo Ado in Ethiopia was housing about 220,000. I'm sure that number is much higher right now because of the war. And Kakuma refugee camp is housing about 200,000 people. So a lot of refugees and a lot of displaced people in the world right now. And I do not think that that statistic will ever go down. The difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker, the definition is exactly the same. The only difference is that refugees already come with status, whereas people seeking asylum come to the US and they apply for asylum here in the US. The one thing that became very apparent during the Trump administration was, you know, all these people are coming from the border, all these people, all these illegals. And what we as advocates kept saying was applying for asylum is legal. It is legal to ask for asylum. And the Trump administration made applying for asylum very, very difficult. One of the programs that was created was called the Migration Protection Protocol, MPP. And that what that program did was anyone that came through the Mexican border, it forced people to stay in Mexico while their asylum hearing was pending. I actually traveled to Matamoros, Mexico, which is on the border with Brownsville, Texas. We're probably going to take that trip again if anyone wants to go. We were connected by a woman named Marty Michael, who is in New York. And there was a group of us that started something called Columbus ITA, which is how I met Sharon. My colleague Lauren Powers and I we were coming back from a detention facility, and we were listening to NPR, and there was an organization called like Angry Tias, which are angry grandmas. And what they were doing is they were meeting when ICE was dumping people out at the Greyhound bus station. So when people were released from custody, they were put on Greyhound buses, and they were no shoes, no food, no money, no nothing. And they were coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. And there was a whole group of people that formed all over the country that were meeting these buses, basically. So our office organized volunteers, supplies, and we would go to the Greyhound bus station 2 to 3 times a day with food, water, bananas. But the first trip to the bus station was we just heard the story on NPR. We went to Meijer, we bought bananas, water, granola bars, and we had no idea this was going on in Columbus. We went to the bus station, and it was apparent who these people were. They were dirty, they had no food, they had no money, and they were coming off with these manila envelopes that were given to them by ICE with their paperwork. And so that day we kind of gave out everything that we had, and then we kept going to the bus station. And then we realized that there was a group of volunteers that were kind of organizing this, but no one had actually gone to the bus station. And I don't speak a word of Spanish, but I'm not intimidated in going into those situations. So we started organizing, and it turned into this amazing group of people that were not part of any organization. It just kind of holistically formed around meeting asylum seekers and just trying to help them get on the right bus and trying to feed them and trying to house them. And we met some incredible people, and we met some incredible volunteers who we're just looking for the next project that we can do as a community. But this group of people actually went to Brownsville, Texas. And in Brownsville, what they were doing was they were cooking food on the Brownsville side and then putting it into strollers and wagons and wheeling it over to the Mexican side and feeding. There was a refugee camp that formed in Matamoros of all the people that were waiting to get their asylum hearing heard. And so at the time that we arrived, it was pre-COVID. It was January of 2020, and World Kitchen had arrived, and World Kitchen had set up a facility in the camp. So we were really fortunate that we just had to cook the food, wheel it over, and then there was a place for us to serve the food. If anyone is interested in doing, it's kind of like ecotourism, but it really isn't. It's just kind of a group of people that wanted to do this. If anyone's interested, let me know. I think Marty is planning another trip. And the ITA, Columbus ITA, then when COVID hit, we started these pop-up food drives, and we partnered with a lot of the Mexican market, the Michoacana Mexican market, to get food. And then we just started serving the undocumented community. So the one thing that the refugee community, even though their resources are quite limited, the undocumented community really has no resources. So that was kind of our focus at that time. I'm just looking at. So after we went, we spent about a year in Louisville. And then we found relatives that lived in Columbus, Ohio. My great-grandfather had sent 3 sisters to the US. And so we relocated to Columbus, and I grew up in Columbus. And I always wanted to be a voice for those that didn't have a voice. And so I went to law school, obviously. And well, before law school, I went to DC to work for a law firm, and I was able to travel back to Russia it was the first time I'd gone back. My parents had always not allowed me to go back. They were always very scared of what would happen, because when you left Russia, you had your passport taken. You were basically banned from going back. But as an American citizen, I could go back, and I worked there, went to law school, spent my summers in Russia. And then it kind of solidified for me what I wanted to do and what I was good at. And I have been doing this for the past, my goodness, it's been 21 years. This November, I have been an attorney for 21 years. I have to say that I love what I do. It is incredibly difficult. I did not think that we would survive the Trump administration. There were so many changes, and there was so much damage done. And I would say at this point that the damage that was done has not been undone. I'm not sure it will ever be undone. The crisis at the border right now, because of policy changes, there really is a crisis at the border. Today I had consultations with 3 Haitian men, that 2 went to Brazil, 1 went to Chile, and then they crossed into the US. The US right now they're not separating families. They're not putting children into cages, but the amount of people coming through the border right now is, we're not able to handle it. And the people that are coming, because of the way that our asylum laws are set up, a lot of these people want to work and want to apply for asylum, but our laws are a little bit archaic in that you can't apply for a work permit. So there really is an incredible need for people to get involved, and for people to understand why people are coming. The people that are coming now are basically very similar to the people that have always come, and that they just want opportunities, and they want to be free of persecution. And based upon kind of how many jobs we do have in the US, and the fact that immigrants want to work, there must be a way that we can match that. There must be a way that we can be creative and progressive and create laws that are able to embrace the people that are coming, so that they can help themselves, but that they can also help the American economic system. I married an American, wanted to marry a Russian, but it was not in the cards. Married a wonderful American man from Vermont, and we have 3 sons. One is currently in college at the University of Vermont. He's 18, and one is 16, and one is 14. And, you never know what you've instilled in your children until they say to you, "Hey, Mom, there's like this refugee project, and like, do you think I should take this class on refugees? And would you think about coming and speaking?" And then you're like, all right, like, this has come full circle. And it's so incredible that my kids have kind of embraced and listened and absorbed some of my passions, and some of the heartache that is involved in doing what I do. There have been so many people that have been deported, so many families that have been separated, so many things that did not need to happen the way it happened. As a Jewish refugee and as someone that left their country, I really believe that there is a way to change our policies, because a lot of the refugee situations around the world are not created by US policies and created by some of the things that we do in the US. And I feel like I have about 10 more years in me to keep fighting and to keep educating and to just keep showing up. And I think that I really I'm happy to share my story with you, not necessarily my slides, but at least my story. And I would be very happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Ina. That was really informative and moving. We do have some questions on chat. Why don't we start with those? How do we fast track the folks getting here to help the US meet the need of companies, hiring needs of companies?
I mean, I think, right, that, there's within the immigration system, right, there's refugee and asylum law, there's family immigration, there's family reunification, and there's employment-based. The US system really does not address current needs. And so it's going to take a lot of creativity to be able to do things that, I have a shortage of workers. Like, I cannot find workers. A lot of companies cannot find workers. So how is it that we cannot figure out a way to put, hell, why doesn't the US just create a temporary agency of, and this might not be the greatest example, but prisoners work in prison and they get paid. So why can we not create a situation where there's a temp agency that vets all of the people that are coming from the border and that creates a way for them to go to work in places that need workers? And then through that process, they're able to get legalized. So I just don't think that when we had the last amnesty that we had was under Reagan. So the last time we had like big immigration reform was under Reagan. We will never have big immigration reform. The Republicans and the Democrats fundamentally cannot agree on who immigrants are and who refugees are. Like, are we good or are we evil, right? Like, who's coming into our country? One set of politicians says that we're evil and the other one says that we're good. And it's 50-50. So we're not going to get immigration reform. What we've also learned is executive action doesn't work. So executive action works for the team that's in charge, but then as soon as that team is no longer in charge, then executive action tends to backfire. And we see that happening with DACA. We see that happening with temporary protected status. We see that happening with the Muslim ban. So it's going to take a lot of creativity and a lot of compromise to have not a big immigration reform or not a big amnesty, but sort of to compromise and to fill those spaces. And right now the spaces are workers. And a lot of the people that are coming over right now seeking asylum are not eligible to work and will never be eligible to work because of the way that our asylum system is set up. So if you come to the US and you do not take an expedited hearing, which happens between 3 to 4 months from the time you arrive, so you don't speak English, you can't find a lawyer, you have no money, how are you going to take an expedited hearing? So if you don't take that expedited hearing, you will never be able to get a work permit. So you will always be in the underground economy.
Well, that's really disturbing to hear. Linda Carr has another question. Do you believe it's possible in our environment in the US to turn the tide to acceptance of people from other countries?
I don't know. Do you live in a red state or do you live in a blue state, right? I mean, just in talking to other Russian refugees, right? Like you would think Russian refugees, right? Like we had advocates that advocated for us to come here. We had people that helped us. We had like everything was given to us so that we could succeed, and then we succeeded. So if you take those Russian refugees who 90% voted for Trump and who do not believe that brown and black people should be given the same opportunities that we have been given, and they will tell you that, we got ours, but they shouldn't get anything. They're different. I'm not sure how you bridge that. I don't know how you bridge that gap. Like I have tried with relatives, I have tried with my parents' friends, and I haven't gotten very far. So how do you change the minds of people? Because we are so divided, and immigration is one of those, besides wearing masks and the vaccine, immigration seems to be right up there with something that we just cannot seem to agree on. So I'm going to be a glass empty kind of girl, but I'm very open to suggestions as to if anyone has how to convince people that refugees and asylum seekers and immigrants are necessary. Like we are those people. We are necessary to make things grow and innovate in the United States. Without immigrants and refugees, it's not going to work.
We have another question here. This is about your personal experience. What was the hardest thing you remember going through as a young girl as your family adjusted to life in the United States?
Climbing Kroger to look for the cans with no labels. That was a little embarrassing. But just the concept of not having, like always wanting and not having. I think that was really, and still having that, I feel like whatever happened to you before you were 10 kind of forms who you are as a person. And I just always remember wanting things and not, that we just couldn't afford anything. And I think that really shaped kind of, like I cannot walk into a store without first going to the clearance rack. Like that is like, I just hone in on the clearance rack. Cause that's right. Like whenever my mom's like, let's go shopping, we're like, oh, let's go to Goodwill. Like that's just like completely shaped who we are. And I'm okay with that. Like, even though now we can afford things, I still clearance rack and Goodwill, like garage sales. Like that's kind of my, but that was really, really hard, especially so when we came to the US, when we came to Columbus, and even when we came to Louisville, because we were Jewish, we were told that we had to go to Orthodox Jewish schools. We knew zero about being Jewish, besides it was in our passports and we were here because we were Jewish. So my parents packed salami and cheese sandwiches to an Orthodox school. I had a D in prayer. I don't even know how they knew how I prayed. I mean, I guess I should have gotten a D because I didn't pray very well, but how they judged me. And just kind of like that, you were forced into going to Torah Academy, into going into this religious institution. And you had, my parents were educated on being Jewish. I wasn't educated on being Jewish. And those standards of just always being different and always feeling different and always feeling less than.
In your practice right now, what are the most common kinds of problems that you see for the immigration asylum seeker, refugee population in Columbus?
The refugee population has very little resources. Chris, us together, you can ask anyone that works anywhere. You know, they do the bare minimum, but they just cannot keep up with the demand. The problem with the resettlement agencies is no one cooperates. So Us Together has a bus that goes and picks up people, and Chris has a bus that goes and picks up people. Us Together has an ESL program, and Chris has an ESL program. God forbid they all come together and just kind of share resources so that they can get more out of their programs. So the refugee living situations are really difficult. The refugee, a lot of these refugee families have very big families, and big families can't live in a 2-bedroom apartment. A lot of the caseworkers that work with refugee populations were refugees themselves maybe a year ago. So they're also struggling as they try to help the newly arrived refugees. And the same with the asylum seekers. A lot of the asylum seekers right now are coming from Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and they're living with other people that arrived a year ago, right? So the people that are sponsoring them are people that arrived a year ago. So there is, we collaborate with a lot of organizations, and we collaborate with a lot of schools, and the need is pretty overwhelming. And then there's misinformation. There's, people that have just lived in Mexico for 8 months are expected to go to Cleveland and apply for asylum. Like, how do you even get to Cleveland? Where is Cleveland? So the barriers to the immigrants and the refugees and the asylum seekers, and we're not a nonprofit, so we do charge fees for services. The nonprofits, yesterday, I met with someone that runs a clinic at the Vineyard, and she had a homeless asylum seeker from Guinea, and Chris wouldn't take the case, and she didn't have the capacity to take the case. And so Columbus has so many people, but we have not figured out how to leverage resources. I just feel like there's a way to leverage nonprofit and for-profit if we can all kind of come together and have those really hard conversations and figure out how to deal with certain types of people and how to deal with certain types of cases, and just maximize what we're able to do versus constantly be like, this is what I do. And I just don't think that we in Columbus have quite figured out how to get along.
Are there folks in the audience that have questions? And if so, if you could just turn on your mic, turn on your camera, and we'll see you. Don't be shy.
Sharon, can you share with us how you got involved in Columbus ITA? Is Sharon there?
Sharon?
Yes, I'm hiding. No, actually,
I'm curious because you came out of nowhere, and I'm just curious.
I did, and I just thought it was like amazing, and this all has always interested me in my life. And so I heard about it and just went down and volunteered and talked to one of the, on Facebook, really. It popped in and I recognized people that were on there. And then Sarah, I forget her last name, and then Lauren, and we went down and helped and package things to give away in Ziploc bags, and met the bus a few times, and, helped a few people, but I'm not fluent in Spanish either. But the tiny little bit that I did, I felt so good about. And it makes me really sad to hear you say that the resources in Columbus that people can't come together. That's really sad. What can we do, guys? I mean, yeah, what's the answer to that? I mean, do you have meetings all the time? Do you get together with those folks?
Oh,
Do you
no.
plan meetings? Can you plan meetings? Everybody's so busy. You're burned out, probably.
I don't even think it's busy or burnt out. I think that there's such limited resources that every agency kind of grabs, every agency grabs and every agency chases the money and not, and doesn't think about, well, we're going to let them have the ESL program and we're going to focus on employment, right?
Yeah,
Because now
right.
you've given up your ESL money. So I think it would take a phenomenal leader to bring everyone together to say, well, don't apply for this grant and we won't apply for this grant, so that we can each do a piece.
Yeah.
And again, the refugee funding and the way the refugee system works is so different. The undocumented have nothing, right? So it's very different pools, very different
Right,
populations.
Right.
If
Are
I
you
might,
still serving out? I'm sorry, Beth. Are you still serving out meals through La Michoacana or not? Are you
No.
still doing-
We did.
I didn't
We
think
did.
so.
No, we
I would have heard.
burnt out, and then Lauren had a baby, so it was.
Right.
We're just kind of coming back and regrouping, and just kind of Julie's taking the lead on the Columbus ITA stuff. So we're just trying to figure out what we're going to do next.
Sharon, I wondered if Sharon went down to Chris, or when you volunteered, how did you do that? Where did you go?
Went down to Ina's office, law office, and did that work.
Oh,
And
okay.
and then we took supplies over to the bus station. We went down to the Greyhound bus station, and they supplied a room for us. It was really an amazing accomplishment what all you guys did to get that all off the ground. I mean, diapers and clothes and food, and I mean, just.
But it took a village, right? Like it took,
It
like
really
someone delivered
did.
bananas every week and someone delivered
Right.
apples every week. And it was really, Lauren coordinated everything. But I do know that Chris and us together, they all have good programs with volunteers. And maybe it takes volunteers to be like, well, why are we doing it this way? Because I think a lot of agencies have a way of doing things, and that's how they've always done things. And no one questions why things are done that way. Right now, I know Chris is organizing kind of adopt an Afghan family, and you have to sign up and you have to be vetted. But I don't think it's that hard to go anywhere and befriend. I mean, I can give all of you a friend. Like it's not hard to find sort of a match that's not in an official capacity, because I feel like if ever you're going through a nonprofit, you have to follow certain rules and certain regulations, and you can't drive them, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And sometimes, well, you have to drive them, because how are they going to get
Anyway,
anywhere?
exactly.
So I'm not always, and when we did Columbus ITA, there were certain people that needed a place to stay, like we would pay for hotel rooms, and you're not allowed to do stuff like that when you're in an official organization.
I was going to say, right now, our church is involved with taking one of the families, and we've got to go through volunteer training. There's all this stuff, criteria that we have to meet before we can do anything. And yeah, so going through the nonprofit really, and they don't have staff because they're short staffed, so they're looking to volunteers to do things that they haven't done before. And so it's very different, but you're right. I mean, there's silos, and it's like, if you just come together, you could meet the needs of so many more people. So I agree with that.
Yeah. And
Maybe
a lot
we
of
should-
churches did, oh my goodness. I mean, we worked with, one of the families that we met at the bus ended up being housed at Just North Church.
Oh, yes.
And they did, I mean, Just North went above and beyond what they needed to do. It was amazing to see so many people come to, and they did teams, there was someone Just North, before they took the family that came from the bus, they did a sanctuary case. So someone went into sanctuary at Just North, and then she ended up coming out of sanctuary and getting status. But they just had teams of people that were responsible for staying with her every night. And like, it was really, but the way
And
that
she
they
was
did things
pregnant too, right? She came in pregnant.
no, the woman that came from the bus came in with like a 3-day-old baby.
Okay, she was there. Yeah, I knew there was a little.
I think she
infant.
gave birth
Because
in
I had
detention or out of detention. Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. I know. Long time there.
Yep. They just had another baby, I heard.
Oh,
So now they have 3.
yeah, 3. They have a little boy.
Does anybody, are there any other additional questions from the audience or comments or?
I was just trying to ask, how long does it take to get the expedited hearing for asylum?
If you ask for an expedited hearing, it takes about 3 to 4 months. The problem with expedited hearings is you are eligible then for a work permit, but 4 months to prepare for an individual hearing where you have to prove that the Haitian government or the Brazilian government or the Russian government has persecuted, it's not enough time. It's just not enough time. So expedited hearings are for people that have really, really strong cases and have the finances to kind of put it together. And I think the biggest issue with our asylum system, well, there's so many issues, but it would just be so much easier if people that are applying for asylum could get a work permit. Like that would solve so many of our economic issues as the United States. And it would also allow them to survive and to be able to support themselves and to thrive. I think that if we had a system by which, you had to learn English, pay your taxes, not have any criminal issues, and pay a penalty fee for entering the US illegally, like to get asylum in the US is almost impossible. Like it is a really high bar. And a lot of people that are coming they're not necessarily fleeing violence. They might be fleeing environmental persecution, right? Like there's nothing to eat. There's nothing to feed your children. I mean, a lot of Central American countries do have a lot of, gang violence, but there just has to be a creative way that we can get what we need from the people that are coming here because they can't survive where they are. And those same people are helping us with our needs. Like if I could only run the world, it would be different.
We wish you could.
This little part.
So
Was
I
that
have a question. My question is whether the city of Columbus has a role in any of this through policy or through any city agencies that could take a leadership role in helping to coordinate some of these services?
I think the city of Columbus, our city council is pretty progressive. During the Trump administration, there was a grant that was given for a pretty large amount of money to go into the detention facilities and educate people in detention facilities about their rights. That grant went to the Guadalupe Center. The grant was for, I don't know, $300,000-$400,000. And I think education is amazing, but if you're in detention, you don't need education. You actually need a lawyer to get you out of detention. I think education about rights is fantastic, but a lot of funds cannot be used for advocacy. So they kind of bury it in education. The city of Columbus recently I came across, there's something called a U visa, which is a victim of crime visa. So if you've been a victim of a crime and you're undocumented and you help assist in prosecuting that crime, which can just be reporting it, you can get what's called a U visa, and then that can lead to a green card legalization. The city of Columbus is fantastic at this. The city of Whitehall, the police chief of Whitehall will not sign these U visas. So we had the dispatch do a story on a client that had been shot and paralyzed. And Ellen Brown called me and was like, what can I do? And I thought that was so telling that she's city of Columbus, but the mayor of Whitehall is a Democrat. The attorney for the city of Whitehall is a Democrat. So she was going to kind of use her leverage to talk to them and see if she could convince the police chief to change his mind. So I think there's always very creative ways to do things. I think we also have Mike Corey leads the human resource. I think there's a human, I don't know what it's called, but it's like the nonprofit. There's like a nonprofit board. He's amazing, but I don't think, I'm not very politically correct. And I think when you go to a lot of these places where all the nonprofits are, everyone's very politically correct and no one calls each other out on their shit. And I think that maybe that's what needs to be done a little bit more.
Yeah, you're right.
Tell us more about the border. Like, I'm also involved in a group that caravans used to go to Cuba. My partner Mel went to Cuba several times. So there's a big, huge bus that they take goods and things down to Cuba. And there is actually a friend shipment down there now. Is there something that we could do, like from here to go with you down to Brownsville, Texas? It'd be like really cool if we had a whole gang of people to go down there.
Oh yeah,
By busload or something.
Matamoros right now is a little bit dangerous. There's a lot of kind of gang warfare going on right now. Plus COVID, plus the camp has now been completely, MPP ended, although they're trying to get Biden to bring it back. But there's a lot of shelters on the border of Mexico that need help. I mean, if anyone, and I just feel like it's so important. The reason that I went was I just wanted to see it firsthand, and I just wanted to witness what was going on firsthand so that you could, when people come to Columbus, we're so removed from kind of what's really happening. And when you see it on the ground, it just opens your eyes to, it just opens your eyes and you just see it from a very different perspective. Like someone's coming to you and they don't, like they don't have anything. We just furnished a whole apartment for someone. They had nothing. There was nothing in their apartment. They have 2 kids at Children's Hospital. And we just all have so much. Like we just have so much stuff. So, I mean, I think that it's totally possible to organize something. I mean, I think a lot of these people need financial assistance, but I think just going and serving food and just seeing firsthand the human suffering, I don't know, it kind of changes you, right?
We're about out of time. Ina's had a very long day, including a very long evening with us.
No, this has been
Thank you so
wonderful.
much.
I'm gonna break my slides into 2 emails and I'm gonna email them to you. I am going to get you this slideshow.
Okay.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful.
It would. I did not get anything in my email, so
Yep, it's too big.
are willing to spend.
Tomorrow's a new day.
But I thank you on behalf of all of us here tonight for a very compelling presentation. And I have to say, you didn't need slides to be compelling.
No.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
It was great to hear from you. and
effort.
know
Thanks,
you
Sharon,
for-
for inviting me.
And everything that you do for our
Thanks for saying yes. We'll
Happy
see you again.
all of
Thank
you. Thank you for being with us tonight. And I hope to see you again in January 25th, 2022.
Mhm.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Sina.
And
Bye.
Bye-bye.